Hey, strangers. Thanks for stumbling into Noir Alley, where your host, that's me, Eddie Muller, likes to surprise you every so often with a movie that has slipped through the cultural cracks and was at risk of dying, lost and forgotten. Today, we have just such a film, the simply titled M. It is not, of course, the celebrated M from Germany in 1931, directed by Fritz Lang, the movie that brought Peter Lorre to prominence and one many cinephiles believe is Lang's greatest cinematic achievement. This M is a remake of that film, transposing it from Berlin to mid-century Los Angeles, but retaining the disturbing storyline. Cops and crooks both launch a manhunt for a child killer who's on the loose in the big city. Now, the police are doing their duty as public guardians, but the criminals are even more eager to get rid of this scourge because his crimes are beginning to bring too much heat down on their underworld operations.
I'm depending on each of you boys in your gangs to watch his own territory. No chiseling, no arguments. You can start your fighting again after we find this guy, get me?
The original M, which was really the first truly revelatory artistic achievement of the sound era, was produced by Seymour Nebenzahl from his German production company Nero Films. Nebenzahl produced movies by many significant directors in Germany, including some who, like him, would eventually emigrate to America when the Third Reich took power. Max Ophuls, Anatol Litvak, his cousin Robert Siodmak, and of course, Fritz Lang. In 1950, Nebenzahl decided to remake his most famous film, setting it in Los Angeles, where he'd been producing pictures for major studios and low-budget independents. Now, some scholars think Nebenzahl was inspired by parallels he saw between the anti-communist hysteria in the U.S. and the fervor that surrounded the Nazis' rise to power when he and Lang made the first M. Well, of course, there's also a practical factor. Nebenzahl owned the rights to the story, which he had updated and Americanized by writers Norman Riley Raine, Leo Katcher, and Waldo Salt. Nebenzahl approached Fritz Lang about directing this second M, only to find the director outraged by the idea. Lang considered the original his magnum opus, a genuine masterpiece, and was offended by the idea that anyone would try to equal it. Douglas Sirk, who had had several of his films produced by Nebenzahl, also turned down the assignment. But the one man who wasn't intimidated by the original or by Lang's wrath was Joseph Losey. He was earning a reputation for making socially conscious dramas such as The Lawless and The Boy with the Green Hair. The latter was a pointed parable about society ostracizing an orphan whose hair one day turned green. In addition to garnering a rep as one of the freshest talents in Hollywood, Losey's progressive politics earned him scrutiny by the FBI and the House Un-American Activities Committee, both of which considered him a communist. Almost defiantly, Losey cast M with a number of actors whose politics were suspect, such as Howard Da Silva, Luther Adler, and Karen Morley. Now, tweaks to the script put the terror of mob vigilantism on an equal plane with fear of a crazed child killer. After this, Losey would be squarely in HUAC's crosshairs. On its release, the picture was boycotted in some cities, not for its disturbing subject matter, but for Losey's political allegiances, which in the spring of 1951 were duly noted in the press. In the midst of all this hue and cry, actor David Wayne was called upon to do the impossible, elicit a measure of empathy for a child murderer, and somehow do it in the shadow of Peter Lorre, whose performance in the 1931 film was justifiably legendary. Until this, Wayne had merely been a pleasant bit player in pictures like Adam's Rib and The Reformer and the Redhead. Here he gives the character of Martin Harrow everything the actor could wring out of himself. And whether you have sympathy for him or not is a moot point. Wayne had the guts and the talent to create a believably human monster. The supporting cast is jammed with familiar faces, including Raymond Burr, Steve Brody, Norman Lloyd, Glenn Anders, Jim Backus, and many more. The film also gives us a fascinating look at downtown Los Angeles and the now vanished neighborhood known as Bunker Hill, starting with a ride on the unique Angel's Flight trolley and ending with a stunning climax inside LA's most famous architectural landmark, the Bradbury Building. From Columbia Pictures in 1951, here is M.